Welcome back to Honored Madman. Hope everybody's been well. So, ravens or crows or crow-like beings are a bit of a staple when it comes to the From Software cinematic universe. Whether it's the giant crow Velka in Dark Souls 1, the Corvians of Dark Souls and Dark Souls 3, the Pursuer being dropped off by a crow in Dark Souls 2, and of course Weaponsmith Ornifex, if anybody remembers her. Or who could forget the crows in Bloodborne? God forbid your weapon hits a wall and you get comboed by one of those fucking things. The reoccurring theme of crows or ravens is also present in other works of fiction, most notably I would say in A Song of Ice and Fire, where they're frequently used as messengers, and the Lord Commander has the one that sort of acts like a parrot and can talk, and of course let's not forget the three-eyed crow, or Blood Raven as he's also known. And also there's some crows in Lord of the Rings, they're just called Crab-Eye from Dunland. But today we're going to be talking about the birds with teeth, also known as the mascot of Caelid, or as Fextra Life calls them, the Monstrous crows. Which I think is pretty fitting. It seems like one of the things Fextra Life has actually gotten right. Now there's a lot of bird type enemies in Elden Ring, or at least a handful, with the Warhawks and the Snow Warhawk, and the Deathbirds of course, but none are quite as off-putting or as almost universally despised as these bad boys. And it's understandable why. I mean, these things, they pursue you to the ends of the earth if you let them. And that downward smash they do with their legs has some fucking seeking range, that's for sure. These, along with the giant dogs, are one of the main reasons why everybody hates Caelid, at least early on. Personally, I think the post-apocalyptic setting has a rather nice and fitting atmosphere. But these things possess a truly messed up appearance, and we haven't even gotten to their underground cousins yet. They've got wings that look really small in proportion to their massive head and enlarged beak, but they are indeed capable of flight, a fact they'll constantly remind you of if you let them. Outside of that devastating leg crush they have, they also possess a few other really fucked up but ultimately cool looking attacks, like the horizontal bite that they do, or the downward pecking combo that I found reminiscent of like Pikmin, that little snake bird boss. Expect a Pikmin video at some point in the future. Now these birds are presumably feasting on the corpses of the fallen knights and soldiers who died and are currently still dying due to Radahn and Malenia's conflict. The Halig Tree Knights are too deep into the swamp to have found any actual interactions with the crows, but the Radahn soldiers and Radahn Knights appear to be trying to drive the dogs and birds from the land, but, to middling results. But these birds aren't just found in Caelid. They're also found in the mountaintops of the Giants, a region that's received a fair amount of criticism, likely due to it dropping in beefed up versions of the dog and crows from Caelid that people enjoyed so much. Now these crows of the mountaintop appear to be fighting the trolls for dominance of this mountainside that is really just little more than a fucking graveyard outside of the Guardian's garrison and the Flame of Ruin itself. But anyway, these crows appear to be at war with the remnant trolls that still reside on the mountaintop. These trolls still possess the ability to call upon the powers of the Fell God, at least briefly in combat, a trait not shared by their southern brethren. The birds appear to outnumber the trolls, as in most examples of them fighting consists of multiple crows jumping one troll, or more often than not at least. But the birds appear to be slowly taking the mountain, which is I guess a bit poetic, since these mountaintops in the clouds were once home to the ice dragons who were once driven off by the giants, who were in turn betrayed by their lesser kin the troll, who are now getting slaughtered by the crows. And I guess it's poetic because the land is more or less dead now, and who better to dominate it than a bunch of monstrous crows, although they may eventually run out of stuff to eat. But I guess probably not, because of how the Elden Ring just revives everything. They'll just get to keep reviving. If they die of starvation, their world will just reset. Who knows the lore implications for shit like that. I never really pay attention to them. But anyway, moving on. Oh, and one last thing I almost forgot. All versions of these crows possess, in my opinion, the most devious ability in all of FromSoftian games. And in this move lies, I think at least, the inspiration for this enemy. So if you hit one of these hard enough or enough times, you'll notice it stagger, which if you're the average player, you'll attempt to capitalize on. Now if you do, you're met with one of the most genius and most hilariously fucked up bullshit I've ever seen in one of these games. When you go in for the swing, the crow grabs you, flies you up in the air, and chucks you to the ground, and I believe just tries to land on you, but when I got it, it was a little clippy. Either way, it hucks you to the ground, and then, it does a considerable amount of damage. But I think the most important thing about it is that it fakes that stagger to fake you out, and I guess a lot of enemies have those type of responsive moves in this game, but I did not for one fucking second see that one coming the first time it happened to me. That was one of those moments where I couldn't even be mad because I wasn't like dying repeatedly or anything. It was just something that kind of happened, and I was like, holy fucking shit, Miyazaki is genius and kind of evil for this one. So we've talked about the Caelid ones and their beefed up mountaintop cousins, but what about the ones everybody is scared of? The horrifically deformed, pus pocket having bloody mass, just overall disgusting variant of the crow found in Magwan Palace. We'll just call them the bloody crows. So these guys are straight up horrific looking. I actually like the design of the regular ones, but these ones, again, applaud to Miyazaki because I love these designs. I love being horrified, but I actually did like the basic murder crow. These ones, on the other hand, they gross me out a little bit, just a little bit. But these ones are different than their topside relatives in a number of ways. First off, I believe they cause bleed buildup. They also now drop the most disgusting item in the game, the blood-tainted excrement. I think it's worth noting that the blood-tainted excrement could in fact be one of the elusive George R.R. Martin contributions to the lore. This is mainly based on my experience while reading A Dance with Dragons. Without spoiling anything, let's just say he describes in great detail a rather disgusting man slowly dying from dysentery. So it's not a passage that's easily forgotten, and naturally when I picked up the blood-tainted excrement, I was reminded of George R.R. Martin. Because that's hardly the only time he's terrorized his readers with shit. But anyway, moving on. This was probably kind of irrelevant, but it felt worth mentioning. Part of the reason why this bloody subvariant is so hated is because of its special attack, which it almost always uses as soon as combat is initiated. They basically slam to the ground and start pecking while moving forward on the ground, gaining an incredible amount of reach in the process. I don't know if I just suck at dodging or those hitboxes are just jank, but it's definitely one or the other. But they sort of violently splash around, pecking, hammering their way forward. It's a sort of desperate looking attack, but it's super fucking effective. But this subvariant is exclusive to the Magwan Palace section of the Lands Beneath. These sore-ridden beauties can be found patrolling the blood lakes or feasting on some unfortunate dead. They appear to be afflicted with the same bloody pox that's afflicting the hounds in this section, and it looks like this pox results in a rather unfortunate death based on the corpse we find that appears to have just collapsed in the blood lake near a bunch of Albinorics. Although this could just indicate that the Albinorics slayed one of these things. Either one is likely. In fact, I would say the more likely outcome is the Albinorics having slayed it. And speaking of death, these monstrous crows only spawn in these 3 locations. And there's one thing that these places have in common. They're all dead lands that have been ravaged in one way or another by outer gods. Melania releasing her inner outer god to stay undefeated, turning Caelid into the interior of an oblivion gate, the war fought between 2 different outer gods, in the mountaintops of the giants that left the area little more than just a wasteland, or Mog experimenting with his newfound gifts he got from the Formless Mother, another outer god, to experiment on crows and Albinorics and create blood zombies as he sees fit. So these crows themselves could just be seen as a sign that an area is dead, at least in the eyes of a god. But I'm sure it's no coincidence that they only show up in areas after they've been completely ravaged by the forces of one outer god or another. Crows often represent death, so it could just be that simple. I was kind of disappointed by the overall lack of lore for these particular creatures, so I decided to do something I don't usually do but should do more often and look at mythology and various folklores that could have inspired it. Or at the very least, how they view crows. I skimmed through both Celtic and Nordic mythologies first, since Elden Ring takes a lot of inspiration from those two, In Celtic lore or mythology, this large bird feeding on carrion with its black plumage and disturbing deep hoarse croak was often seen as an omen of death or just ill omen in general. But the birds themselves were also viewed as powerful, for straddling as it does the worlds of the living and the dead. Therefore, it was often depicted as a sort of messenger between the two worlds. And there's a lot of other cool stuff there involving ravens. And crows are equally badass in Norse mythology as well. Odin is often associated with ravens, sometimes referred to as the Raven God, and he's often depicted with his two crows, Hugin and Munin. I'm probably pronouncing those wrong, but you guys know what I'm talking about. And Valkyries are also often associated with crows who follow them around to feast on the dead from the Valkyries' battles. It was said that wherever the Valkyries went, a swarm of crows was said to follow. That's some pretty cool stuff there, but it wasn't quite what I was looking for. I didn't really see anything outside of appearance-based inspiration. Outside of, I suppose, the crows being in Caelid after Melania's destruction of the land. I guess that's rather similar to the ravens following the Valkyries around in Nordic times. Especially because Melania herself is called the Severed Valkyrie. Or is it the Scarlet one? It doesn't matter. You guys know what I'm talking about. Then I remembered a little game called Neo and took a look at Japanese folklore regarding crows. And that was when I came across the Karasu Tengu, or the Kotengu. Now, Tengu are often depicted as sort of long-nosed, goblin-looking things, but I believe the actual translation is a type of divine dog of some kind. But they're various spirits and figures in Japanese folklore. This particular type was said to resemble large birds of prey with human-like characteristics. They often wear robes of an ascetic and mystical hermits called Yamabushi, and they sometimes carry fine weapons or other items stolen from human homes or temples. They behave like savage monsters. They live solitary lives, but on rare occasions band together or with other yokai to accomplish their goals. They accumulate hoards. Kotengu collect and trade trinkets and valuable magic items. When angered, they throw tantrums and go on destructive rampages, taking out their anger on anything near them. And when it comes to humans, they have little respect for them. They feast on human flesh and commit rape, torture, and murder for fun. Some of their favorite games are abducting people to drop them from great heights deep into the woods, or tying children to the tops of trees so all can hear their screams but none can reach them. Kotengu kidnap people and force them to eat feces until they go mad. They especially revel in sacrilege. They love to torment monks, nuns, rob temples, and try to seduce the clergy. They're pretty much just overall like evil spirits, like hilariously evil, to the point of being almost over the top. Although I believe modern folklore depicts them as sort of comic relief idiots who sort of get tricked by humans all the time. So they kind of got a pretty rough retcon there. It's almost like a Disney Star Wars style retcon. Now, a couple things in that description stood out to me, at least when it comes down to resemblance to our monstrous crows. This could all be circumstantial, I guess, but them banding together reminds me of how they act in the mountains, towards the trolls. Them being tricksters reminds me of how they feign being staggered. And that bit about their favorite activity being dropping people from large heights reminds me of that messed up grab attack. And the bit about them becoming enraged reminds me of some of these monstrous crow attacks, namely the peck combo. And honestly, generally most of their attacks looks like they're attacking you with such fury that they just want you fucking destroyed and then in their belly. There's also the mention of them appearing somewhat humanoid and bearing a resemblance to dogs. And the giant dogs and murder crows share some animations, so that oftentimes leads to them looking a bit similar, which in turn oftentimes leads to theories about the birds devolving into dogs, something I read on Reddit earlier. Not a theory I subscribe to or anything, just something I saw. But it's not like we don't already have a precedent for dog-crow hybrids, which, as Bloodborne puts it in a rather roundabout way, is the stuff of nightmares. And I believe Karasu means crow, and so I believe the words together are like crow dog, which again reminds me of those horrific things from Bloodborne and that goofy theory I read on Reddit. But then I found another lore source on the Karasu Tengu that mentions that they either have a crow's head with a human body, or have a pair of wings, or is a huge humanoid bird. And there's also some cool stuff about them acting as protectors of trees and devouring people who cut the trees that they guard. which is a bit similar to the crows of Caelid, who sometimes rest atop the husks of dead trees, and will most definitely devour any traveler who happens to walk near it, using those razor-sharp teeth to shred them piece by piece. Also about them having the ability to teleport, which is pretty rough, and the obvious ability to fly. They love to abduct people and then release them eventually, but with an impaired memory or memory loss overall, which is called tengu kakushi, hidden by a tengu, which doesn't really correlate to anything we see in the game, but I just felt like it was worth mentioning since I did all this research. But without reading all of that, I wouldn't have found the key reason why I believe the monstrous crows were inspired by the Karasu tengu, and leave it to some asshole on YouTube to reserve the best part of the video for the very end, and for it to be underwhelming. It's the teeth. I'm talking about the teeth. The Karasu tengu, at least in several images I found, are depicted with having a row of fang teeth, or at least just a couple fang teeth. So all this time I thought that they were just referencing It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They were actually just inspired by some classic Japanese folklore. And in the process of all this, I was reminded that I need to finish playing Nioh 2 and to play Nioh 1. So in the end, I think it's very likely that these crows could just be like a type of naturally occurring wildlife in the lands between whenever some area is particularly ravaged by an outer god of some kind. Maybe it doesn't even take an outer god's influence to cause them to show up, just a lot of dead, but it makes me wonder why we don't see them appear at certain places like the outer wall of Landell or Mount Gelmir for that matter. Especially considering that Gelmir was the site of the longest and most bloody battle of the Shattering, but no great ravens there. Perhaps they avoid places associated with the Golden Order and the Greater Will. I do think their appearance in Caelid and the mountaintops are based entirely on them wanting to feed, and there being a lot of dead for them to consume in both of those regions. It's sort of hard to ignore the certain similarities in the places that these birds show up. Well, I suppose there's really only two, but they are significant. They show up where there's a lot of dead for them to eat, but only if the area has been affected by an outer god of some kind, or in some way. With Melania being a vessel for the outer god, having turned Caelid into Pripyat, Ukraine, as well as Marika and Radagon turning the mountaintops into a giant graveyard. This could of course just be a coincidence, but then what about the Bloody Crows? They also showed up somewhere where there's a lot of dead and there's the influence of an outer god. But more importantly, how the fuck did they end up down there, underground? Well, we don't really know, but there's a number of possibilities. So if we take a look at the map, we see that the Mogwin Palace underground section is right beneath Caelid. Specifically, it's underneath Radagon's arena. You can even see some of the same type of ruins. You can even find the same type of ruins in both Mogwin Palace, at least in the beginning, and the outskirts of Radagon's arena. So I guess an obvious assumption would be that the crows found their way down here on their own, either through some kind of cave system or just through digging of some kind. I would say it's possible that they were just naturally occurring down here like some of the other wildlife, but I believe most of the other wildlife is sort of shepherded by the ancestral followers, the flower-picking minotaur-looking guys, who I definitely am working on a video about. It just keeps getting pushed back. And these crows, though, they don't seem like they're able to be domesticated or herded in any way like the other animals. And also, unlike regular crows, these monstrous ones are more than capable and willing to eat living prey as well as carrion. But the other alternative is that Mog brought them down there wanting some kind of a pet or something. But both of those outcomes don't really answer the question of how things went all pear-shaped for them. Like, these birds look seriously fucked up. I mean, they're already like super crazy looking, but the ones down here are just messed the fuck up looking. So if we pull a Bear Grylls and examine and sift through the droppings of these great beasts, we discover the presence of eggs in their blood-tainted feces. Now that's odd. The blood-tainted feces itself only occurs naturally in Mogwin Palace and only drops from the Bloody Crows. So unlike the Bloody Albinorics and Blood Zombies, they don't appear to have been uplifted by the Formless Mother or Mog, so I don't really think that they're Mog's experiments. They appear to have just gotten some kind of a parasite or multiple parasites from eating all the fucked up meat down here. It looks like something similar is going on with the dogs too, because they have the same like bulbous pus pocket poxmark looking things all over them too. Dogs often seem to just reflect the environment they're at though, because we obviously see a bunch of scarlet rot ones. in Caelid that have similar features. I believe there's also a few of them even in the consecrated snowfield. But anyway, it can be implied then that these crows found their way down here and started eating the carrion like they do just about anywhere else. Maybe they were even attracted by the influence of an outer god like I was alleging earlier. Except the formless mother isn't quite like any other outer god. It sort of affects bodies and uplifts them in different ways. I mean, these crows are definitely hardy and they're definitely resistant to stuff like scarlet rot. I mean, yes, they can be scarlet rotted, but they're residing in Caelid, eating a bunch of rotten meat and presumably breathing in Caelid fumes, which can't be good. I mean, you don't see any other wildlife out there besides the fucking dogs, which look fucked up as well. Which brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about. I mentioned earlier a theory that I had been made aware of because of, all places, Reddit. I didn't really care for the way the theory was written because it's written in like a matter-of-fact, I'm right kind of way. And it's basically speaking like it proved this with actual evidence and facts, and it really didn't. It's just basing it off of the fact that they share animations and that they bear slight resemblances to each other, but again, that has to do with the sharing of animations. So they were basically saying that they started off as crows, that these crows came down from the mountaintops, came to Caelid, and started changing into dogs due to the effects of the corruption of the scarlet rot, probably from all the scarlet rot meat they were eating. Basically, the first stage is them as crows, the second stage is them as like the hairless dog that we see in front of Gowry's house, and the third would be the dog, the giant dog at least, with fur. I call him the good boy, because look at that face. Part of the evidence they had that these mutations were due to scarlet rot is that Radahn's army fights them with fire, which is something that's used to burn out the scarlet rot and stave off its effects. Radahn's knights even burnt their fucking emblem on their armor as a testament to their resolve. But personally, I don't think that really proves anything. I think that both these dogs and these crows are scavenger races, sort of like coyotes, and that they go wherever there's dead bodies to feast on. The fact that Radahn's troops are fighting them with fire is because Radahn's troops, the knights included, their main attribute is fire outside of the gravity arrows that some of the knights have. They have fire-based attacks, so of course they're using fire to fight them. Same with the burning of the corpses. I mean, they could be burning them because there's a certain undead problem that's currently going on in the lands between, and they don't want to deal with undead variants of these giant dogs and giant birds. There's numerable other explanations for stuff like that. I'm not trying to just dunk on this theory or anything, but if they were originally the same type of creature and they were turned into dogs by scarlet rot corruption, then how the fuck did it happen up in the mountains? Because there's both dogs and crows up there. But yeah, I just personally don't think that this theory is true at all. I think they're just two different species of scavenger animals that go wherever the dead is. I think the dogs in particular get big because there's just a lot of dead to eat in these areas. And it could also have to do with the caliber of warrior that died in Caelid. Maybe just stronger warriors makes the scavenger dogs bigger. Same with eating giants up in the mountaintops, which is why the dogs we see in Mogwin Palace are small, because they haven't really eaten anything that would give them great power. Instead, they just ate the same dead that the crows did and gained this weird poxy parasite sickness from it. I think the appearance of these monstrous ravens, though, after these great battles of legend, seems like a From Software take on Norse inspiration. Like how Dark Souls had world serpents, but like with its own unique spin on the concept. But perhaps these guys just feed on the corpses of great warriors only, because it was said a lot of great warriors perished in the war against the giants, and even more than that probably perished in Radahn and Malenia's conflict, seeing as how they were said to be the two greatest of the demigods. It would stand to reason that their followers were also mighty, and thus would provide adequate subsistence for our birds with teeth. In the end, though, I suppose there's no real definitive answer as to why they appear in the places that they appear. We can only really just make assumptions off of what we're given, and we're given very little about these guys. They don't appear to have any association with the death birds or their outer god or its vassal, the twin bird. Those entities have to do with the death rite and the ghost flame and all that, and while these great crows do have to do with death in a way, in their own way, they don't appear to have any association with the ghost flame or any of these death birds. The death birds themselves have like human skulls, so I don't think there's any relation, but I could always be wrong. Been wrong before. And I definitely will again. I also said earlier in the video that the pursuer was dropped off by a raven, but upon closer examination, mainly on the bird that takes us to the Bastille, I realized that that bird might be a hawk, which would make sense. A hawk is an apex predator, the pursuer is an apex predator. I think me remembering him being dropped off by a raven Has something to do with an old theory about the pursuer being the main character from Dark Souls 1 trying to stop the character from Dark Souls 2 from linking the fire, which is a wacky but fun theory that I really liked back when I was playing Dark Souls 2. I don't really subscribe to it anymore. I think that the pursuer is just more of like a Terminator of some kind. But these birds with teeth are a rather mysterious enemy, and I'm rather fond of them, honestly. I think that they're really interesting. I think they have a cool design. The Caelid ones are fun to fight, the Mogwin Palace ones aren't. They fit in the aesthetic and atmosphere of the game really well, in my opinion. It's just a monstrous looking crow. Of course, the crows don't look natural. Of course, they've got teeth. Like many enemies in this game, I hated them at first, but they've grown on me with time. Expect a dogs of Elden Ring or a wolves of Elden Ring in the near future, because I really enjoyed examining this little group of wildlife and all their possible inspirations and origins. As for the giant crow carcass that looks covered in sores, while I do think it's possible the Albinaurics took it out, which would fortify the idea that they are sort of invasive to Mogwin Palace region. They showed up to eat the dead bodies and then got infected by them. The particular carcass looks like it collapsed. Personally, that's how I look at it. But it could just as easily be the next stage in what happens to these messed up, sore-covered bloody crows. So maybe if they eat enough of this bloody meat, and I don't know, house enough of these nasty, revolting eggs, the bird might lose control of its body, surrendering entirely to these possible parasites. Afterwards, the bird's body just sort of becomes fertilizer for these eggs to grow more parasites to infect more birds and dogs that come and eat them. Its body remaining there could be evidence of that, since it doesn't disappear like other ones, but that could just be for gameplay reasoning, and maybe they just wanted to use one of these carcasses as decorations. Although From Software rarely does things unintentionally, it's tough to say what exactly happened to this bird. At the risk of just spewing off random shit I just learned, I believe I covered everything I wanted to get to about these monstrous crows. So if you learned anything new about these birds with teeth, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. That would really help me out. Dislike it if you didn't like it, that's fine with me. And the next video should be up tomorrow or the next day. It'll probably be about a bunch of knights, or Ranni, or Rykard. Who knows what it'll be about? We'll see tomorrow. But as always, without further ado, let us have our outro.